My name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations. And today we're working on the Coming Together shawl, which uses 6 different colors that come together in unique ways. They play together with all different stitch patterns, and it creates a masterpiece for your neck. Right here are these little garlands, and we are going to make those today, and they're not hard, but they have really great visual impact. So what we're going to do is on the right side rows, each of these stitches that looks like a little bump, that's going to be a knit yarn over knit. So we create these little bobbles by increasing stitches on one side, doing a knit yarn over knit into each stitch. And then when we work the wrong side, we're going to be carrying the yarn across the right side, creating these little loops of garland. And then with those 3 stitches that we increased, we're going to decrease back to 1 by doing a knit 3 together through the back loop. So it's really a combination of stitches that are not difficult to work. We just want to make sure that we're doing them correctly in the right order, and then we'll come up with these beautiful garlands to adorn your shawl. Okay, so I am all ready to work my garlands on this second version of my Coming Together shawl. You can see my C1, which we worked that line of central double decreases to create this beautiful center spine. I'm working this symmetrically for section 1. Things will change up a bit in section 2. And right now I've got my color C3 attached, which is the gold, and I'm going to be joining color C5, which for this version of the shawl is this beautiful light pink. All of these yarns are Emma's yarn, and they have kits specially created to go with this design. Okay, so I'm going to begin by showing you how I like to join my new yarn. So here's what I do. So for the first stitch, I work it as normal. So I'm joining C5, which is my Himalayan salt colorway. I love that colorway name. All right, and then I hold the yarn and the tail together, the working yarn and the tail together, because we're holding these together for the first few stitches is actually going to weave in that end as I go. And then I like to carry the second color up the side of the shawl. And so here's what I do. So I stick the point of the needle in to do my knit front. And before I knit into the front of the stitch, I'm actually going to take this gold yarn, my other color, and cross it over the pink. And that way I can lock that stitch into place. I can lock that yarn into place like that. So I did that on the knit part of the stitch, and now I'm going to knit into the back of that stitch for my KFB. Okay, and that locked that gold yarn along the inside of my shawl, and it will be carried up the side of the shawl. Okay, I'm going to show you that one more time. So let me undo this stitch. Okay. All right, so when I left the C3, it was just hanging off to the side. I've knit my first stitch with C5, and now I'm going to go into that stitch to knit my KFB, but before I draw up the loop with the C5, I'm going to cross the gold over the pink. Okay, so it had been over to the side. I just cross it over, and then I knit into the front of the stitch as I was going to do, and into the back of the stitch. Now, again, I'm holding these 2 yarns together. You don't have to do this. This is what I like to do because this yarn will automatically be worked with that other stitch or with the other yarn. I just have to remember when I come back to these stitches that this is just one stitch here, even though there are 2 yarns and this is 1 stitch. So far I have 3 stitches on the needle. 1, 2, 3. And I'll keep these two together and I'll work a couple stitches just to really secure that end and keep it away from the very edge. Okay, so I'm ready to work the patterning part of this row. I am working on row 43 at the moment for this pattern. So I'm going to slip one with yarn and back. So I always slip purlwise unless it tells me otherwise, and I keep that yarn held toward the wrong side. And now I'm going to work a knit, yarn over, knit, KYOK. Go into the next stitch, knit, but do not pull it off the needle, yarn over, knit. And now I take that stitch off the needle. All right, that yarn tail is securely held in place. I've used it for 5 stitches. I don't need to have the yarn tail held anymore. Okay, I'm going to slip with yarn and back. Now I'm going to do another KYOK. Pull it off, and then this is what it will actually look like if you don't have your yarns held together. So slip with yarn and back, knit, yarn over, knit, slip with yarn and back. And I'm just going to continue working that patterning. Now I can attempt to show you this as a thrower would do it. Now I'm going to knit, yarn over, knit into that stitch. All right, slip one with yarn and back, and I'm going to knit, yarn over, knit into that stitch. All right. Continental is my preferred method. I'm going to slip back there. I'm coming up on the central spine. I've got my marker there just to help keep it all straight. So let me show you what happens when I get there. All right, my final knit, yarn over, knit to 1 stitch before the central double decrease marker. I'm going to slip 2 knitwise, knit 1, and then pass the 2 slip stitches over. I'm going to go ahead and move my removable stitch marker to keep it on that stitch and work till the end of the row. I'll meet you back here once I get to the wrong side. Okay, I just completed the right side row with all of those knit, yarn over, knits. And all of those we increased from 1 stitch to 3 stitches. And on this wrong side row, they're all going to be decreased back down to 1 stitch. All right, and I'm going to begin just as I have been with knit 1, knit front and back, and purl 1. Okay, I'm ready to slip my first stitch. Now I'm going to continue slipping it purlwise. Normally on like a mosaic pattern, the yarn is usually held toward the wrong side whenever you slip it. But for this pattern, we want to create that looped garland effect. And so I'm actually going to hold this toward the right side as I slip that stitch, which will carry the yarn across the front of the work. Okay, I'm ready to work my knit 3 together through the back loop. All right, so I've got these 3 stitches, but instead of going this way, I'm going through the back of the loop. So I slide my needle behind all 3 and I knit 3 together through the back loop. Slip 1 with yarn and back, slide my needle in. Now it's easiest to get your tip in if these stitches are closer to the tip of the needle. It gives you a little bit of extra room, and you want to go into the backs of the stitches and you knit 3 together through the back loop. And I'm going to continue slip one with yarn and back. Sometimes it takes a few tries to get it through into there. And knit 3 together through the back loop. So slide that tip in behind those stitches, knit 3 together through the back loop. All right, and let me show you what it looks like on the front so far. You can see those slipped stitches with the yarn carried in front, and it creates that little garland effect, which you'll notice more once we knit our next stockinette row with the gold. Okay, so I'm coming up on the end of this row. I do want to remind you that when you are slipping those stitches, don't pull that yarn too tightly. We don't want it to choke those stitches. We want it to create a beautiful little garland across the front. Now, if you remember, this knit yarn over knit was worked by holding that yarn double with the tail of the yarn. So this is going to be my trickiest one to go into because I actually have what looks like 6 stitches that I'm going into, but we know that it's really only 3. And this is the trickiest part of holding that tail together on a patterned row such as this. So I have to go into all of the stitches. I'm going to hold it a little closer to the tip and pull that yarn through. And it is going to create a slightly larger bobble on the front, but I don't find that to be any more noticeable when working or when looking at the design. So I slip one with yarn in front. I'm going to purl this one. Now some people might prefer to knit that one, keeping it in garter, or working it as a slip stitch. This is how I've chosen to do this version. So KFB on my second to last stitch and knit 1. All right, and that is my first garland created. And you're going to see it a little bit better after I've knit the C3. So as I get this started, I just want to show you one more time how I carry that yarn. It's a little less confusing when there's only 2 strands and you're not holding one with the tail. So my pink I had just laid down over to the side, over here. Now I'm working my gold. It has been carried up the back of the shawl. So I'm going to knit 1. Now I'm going to do a KFB, but before I pick up that gold, I'm going to cross the pink over the gold. And do my knit front, then go and knit into the back. And now that pink is secured along the back of the shawl. I'm going to knit across these stitches. And I'll come back in just a minute to show you what it looks like at the end of this row. Okay, so I went ahead and I worked both the right side and the wrong side in the gold, just so you can see the garland a little bit better. You'll see it even more as the shawl progresses. But right here I've got these little bobbles or nups that were easily created. They have these swaths of garland in between, stringing them all together across the front of your shawl. And it's simple stitches with a really dramatic impact. The other thing I wanted to show you is that my shawl, as you can see, wants to curl up. This goes away when you wet block your shawl. I want to reassure you. So if this is happening, it's just because of the shaping of these stitches. It is not going to be like that in your final shawl as long as you properly block it. And here is my final shawl that is blocked and beautiful, nice and pointy. It lays flat, it drapes beautifully. You can see these garlands across the front, and there are so many fun stitch patterns coming up. You've got chunky ribbing, you've got plaid, you've got garter stitch, you've got a play on a faro ribbing and bricks and more garlands and ridge checks and garter goodness and a little bit of waffle ribbing. So all of these textures, take all of these colors and bring them together for a really fun shawl. You can find this design along with all of my other patterns on Ravelry.com and PaperDaisyCreations.com. And as always, I wish you very happy knitting.